Hello masipoti sebabukeli sinamkele kwinkqubo yethu yale veki simphathele yona ke apha ku-SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Igama lam kaloku ngusisanda Jonas, nikhumbule ukuba nani ke ningathabatha inxaxheba kwincoko yethu yanamhlanje kwambini kwethuba. Inombolo zethu apha estudio zithi 011-714-6918 okanye ke ku-011-714-6919. Usenokusithumelela ke ne-email ku-consumer@sabc.co.za okanye usifumane ku-Facebook okanye ku-Twitter. There has been concern over the fleecing of social grant beneficiaries. Often their money has vanished through deductions for services they don't need. The latest has been the monthly deduction of their pay for airtime, which they have often not requested or never gets to them. Now, the South African Social Security Agency, SASA, is clamping down on the dubious deductions from the pay of social grant beneficiaries, especially senior citizens.
Izinga lokuxhashazwa kwabantu abathola imali ezibonelelo kuhulumeni selinyuke ngelinye izinga kakhulu. Izindaba ezibuhlungu zogoga sebehamba nemali encane kakhulu emakhaya sezijwayelekile. Konke lokhu kudalwa abantu asebethola igoli labo kulabantu abahola impesheni. Iminyaka neminyaka iziteshi la kuholelwa khona impesheni bese ziyindawo lapha abathengisi abenza khona imali eshisiwe. Bethengisela ogogo kanye nabanye abanganalo ulwazi kahle abaphila ngemali ezibonelelo sikahulumeni. Laba bathengisi ke bathathisa ama-loan, bethengise ne-airtime kanye nayo yonke imishwalensi le abantu abangayidingi. Ngaphambi kokuthi zisale zingenamali izesulelwa, abaningi sebeyacela ezikweletini. Sikhuluma nje abanye omazisi babo phecelezi ama-ID esehlala kumashonisa ngoba benza isiqiniseko sokuthi bazokwazi ukumkhokhela umashonisa imali yabo. Laba badayisi ke bathengisela kakhulukazi izalukwazi izinto eziningi abangazidingi, kakhulukazi osomasingcwabisane abaningi, kanti umuntu udinga umasingcwabisane oyedwa nje vo. Ingakho ke umphathisa we-social development uBathabile Dlamini esefake unyawo kulolu daba. Usivale ukuthathwa kwemali yabantu kumakhadi abo ngendlela engafanele futhi wavala nokuthi laba badayisi bethengise eziteshini la kuholelwa khona impesheni. uFrank L we Social Security Agency uthi bazimisele ukuthi bebasize abantu abahola imali yabo kulenkinga, kakhulukazi abantu abadala kakhulu njengoba bona umthetho wabo ungahambiselani ngemali okubolekwa kakhulukazi kumashonisa.
The South African Social Security Agency does not endorse or support any financial services products that are being sold, which could be microlending amongst other things, and the sale of airtime to beneficiaries. The provision of the grant is intended to ensure that people can sustain their livelihoods.
Sukela ekuqaleni kukaJune iSASA yavala ama-debit order abanjwa kumakhadi abo. Bathi imali evumelekile ukubanjwa imali yomasingcwabisane futhi nakhona ingeqi ku-10% kwele mali oyitholayo. Futhi bathi bona beusasa angeke vume ukuthi kube yibo abatheswa umthwalo wokukhokhela omashonisa ngenxa yesivulane esenziwe abantu ababaholelayo. Baxwayisa abantu abanamakhadi akaSASA ukuthi kuyicala ukunika iphini yakho kanye nekhadi lakho kumashonisa ngoba uzama ukwenza isiqiniseko sokuthi umashonisa wakho uzokwazi ukumkhokhela. Sekube nezikhalazo eziningi kakhulukazi eziphuma kogogo zokuthi badonselwa imali airtime njalo mabeyohola kanti nale airtime abayisebenzisi nokuyisebenzisa.
The challenge mainly lies around people signing agreements and using the card as collateral. We have gone on a campaign to educate people not to use the card as collateral to secure a loan, because once the money is paid into the account, there's a perception that it is not government's responsibility to dictate to beneficiaries as to what they need to do with the money. But I think the agency feel that it has a moral obligation.
iSASA isithembisile ukuthi izobavikela abantu bayo kulabathengisi.
We say to the beneficiaries that if you have secured a loan, you have not signed or given the necessary authority for your SASA card to be debited, that mechanism of filing a dispute is in place and people can call Grindrod Bank and have that debit order reversed and the monies would be recovered and paid back to into the beneficiary's account.
SASA ithanda ukukhumbuza abantu abathola imali yabo ukuthi le mali ababanika yona akuyona imali yokuvula izikweletu kodwa imali yokuthi bekwazi ukuthenga ukudla kuleyo nyanga. Ngalamaholidi kaKhisimusi SASA izobe inama-consumer awareness campaigns ekuzabeni ukufundisa abantu babo ukuthi bangayisebenzisa kanjani imali ababanika yona ngendlela enobukhali. Unompumelelo Mthethwa, Yilungelo Lakho, eGoli.
Ungenanzulu ke kumxholo wokuxhatshazwa kwabo ke bafumana isibonelelo sikarhulumente ingakumbi abadala masamkele ke indwendwe zethu samkele uNeo Lweto ovela kwiofisi yomxazululi wengxaki zabo basematyaleni iCredit Ombudsman Office sibe naye ke noFrank Earl yena ungumlawuli ophezulu phaya kwaSASA iSouth African Social Security Agency. Welcome to the program. I mean, this is quite a huge problem and I'm sure SASA is aware of it, is concerned about it. Let me start with you, Frank, on how widespread this problem is.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for having us. I think the problem is widespread throughout the country. Let me first of all say that the South African Social Security Agency has a mandate to be able to pay social grants to over 16 million people. It does not, and I want to repeat that it does not provide any financial services to any of its beneficiaries, and these could include microloans, short-term insurance, funeral insurance, retirement annuities, and any other financial service pros. And I think these include the sale of airtime. And I think we'd want to say that the only benefit that is allowed in terms of a permissible deduction on the social grant is a funeral benefit, which should not exceed 10% of the value of the grant. So, for example, if it's 1,300, the deduction should be 300 Rand, and that is the only deduction that we would allow before the grant is paid into the beneficiary's account. And this mandate we would take from the beneficiary who's in fact bought a funeral policy. Where there are two or more policies that exceed the 10%, we would take the oldest one in terms of its inception. And I think we've done that so that we protect the pensioners from vulnerable companies that want to sell financial services products to that. Now, of late, we've had a lot of complaints of where people have complained that their accounts have been debited with various products that they did not buy, which would include loans, the sale of insurances, which could be related to funeral, they could be related to retirement and annuities. And I think these calls had come in through the Minister's office, the office of the CEO, and throughout our offices. Then we've taken a decision to investigate this matter. And I think we've taken it on the understanding that most of the people who complain claim that they are unlawful deductions, which simply means that they did not sign any agreements. But over and above, there's also what I would call ambush marketing. I call it ambush is that a lot of these products are being sold using cell phone technology, and I think you and I probably also get these where they say, if you want to buy this, if you're not interested, press stop. Now, if you want to sell these products to Ukoko, who doesn't really understand cell phone technology and gets these messages and this says, if you want to buy airtime, press 1 and put in a certain number and then confirm yes. Once you begin to do that, it simply means that you're entering into an agreement, and of course then your account obviously will be debited, and with the result that you're paying for something that you've never used.
Frank, ndiyafuna ubuza yintoni yenza ukuba le ngxaki okanye obu buqhophololo bube lula kwaba bantu bazama uthengisa ii-products zabo? What gives rise to these problems?
You would have noted that the agency recently obviously introduced a new payment system, and I think in that payment system a biometric enabled card was introduced. Now this card is able to it's able to operate within the national payment system. It's any card like you and I have. It simply means that you can do debit orders on the card. You could swipe your card at retailers and buy anything. If you want to enter in an agreement, most companies who are in the micro-lending business, you go in, then you swipe your card and you put in your PIN. It simply means that you can become then vulnerable. So the card operates within the national payment system, and there are rules that govern that. And I think some of these companies have taken advantage of the fact that rules within the national payment system allow for debit orders, because you would know previously is that SASA did not allow that. Was simply most of the loans that were granted and the products were sold outside of pay points, where people were getting their money paid out at pay points. Now that they've got a lot of payment options, which means they can go to ShopRite, Checkers, they can go to banks, and they can go to traditional payments, it's made life a lot easier for them. But at the same time, it's also made them a bit vulnerable to some degree, because if you take your card and your PIN and you give it to anybody, if he has a banking facility within his institution, he can then load a debit order. So in a nutshell, it simply means if you sign an agreement, that agreement would then be sent to the company's bank, who would then process it via the banking system, and then ultimately Grindrod, the card, the card that's issued, the SASA card is issued by Grindrod, they then in essence would then debit your account. And I think it's the banking technology that has allowed some of these people to exploit.
I think Indaba, Frank touched on it a little bit, is that maungena into a credit agreement and you sign. And the issue here is that Melo unike you have to give permission. Uguti, you are able to debit my account, or this is the manner in which I will pay for whatever loan I've taken. And inkinga becomes that if you've done the signing in terms of a credit agreement and said, debit the account yam with this sum of money, it turns into a credit agreement, and that's how we enter into that space, because sidila nama credit agreements and so on. And that is, but you've given permission. I think that is, at the end of the day, the big thing, Ukuti. Have you given the permission, Ukuti, but debit the account yako with that money?
I don't have that kind of, well, I didn't give permission.
Kushoguti, it's fraud. I mean, if you did enter into, as I'm saying, Kuti, maungena into a credit agreement, Sisanda, you have a choice, Ukuti, this is the wings of Batalangakon. And as soon as we are debiti, when you didn't give permission, Kushoguti, there's a breach in that credit agreement. Ahambelan with umteto wa the credit agreement that you signed. So that is where we can enter into that.
Frank, on the insert, you did touch on the fact that abantu baye bazifaka ngokwabo kwezimeko banikezele ngamakhadi abo ebantwini kanye banikezele ngepin numbers zabo. Ungathini kule ndawo?
Ngampela Sisanda, we'd always urge abantu to never to get into an agreement, ngoba most time abantu bayaboleka, and then when it's time to pay back bayabaleka and say I did not sign. Most of the investigations we do in some cases, we find that there is an existing agreement. So in some cases a beneficiary goes to one micro and aboleke 300 la, and then I to another one aboleke 500, and Gushuguti at the end of the day, when he has to pay back Gushu the installment, it might be almost to the value of 700 or 800. This is a small section of the population. I would say that the grand population abenza kanjalo, but most of the people in some cases come back and say I did not sign anything, got patete 500 rand. And I think within the National Payment System, the Reserve Bank Act makes provision through the Payments Association's mandate to say that any dispute that is lodged through a bank in terms of where a debit order has been done, of course, provision is made to say that you can lodge that dispute. And in our case, we've made provision through the Grindrod Bank to say that you've obviously debited that account. Therefore, this customer is now saying, Angzangi bolekele mali. So reverse it and make sure that the monies are credited. Now, in most cases, they do go and borrow, but when it's time to pay back, we are pig. But then when we go back and investigate, we find the paperwork that you did. Hence our decision to say that we would want to urge them not to get into any credit agreements. Now the grant itself obviously is very little, and that is used to sustain your life. If you go and borrow 2,000 rand, simply means you put yourself in a financial fix and you're unable to then service that debt.
All right, let's continue after the break. Makeke sithi xa apho mawethu sititsi evenkileni kodwa ke phambi koko nikhumbule ukuba nani ke ningavakalisa ezeni izimvo incoko yethu yanamhlanje. Inombolo zethu apha studio zidi 011 714 6918 okanye ke ku 011 714 6919. You can also email your views to consumer@sabc.co.za or catch us on Facebook or Twitter. Welcome back usabukele inkqubo Yilungelo Lakho, it's your right. Simphathele yona ke apha ke kumahamba phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Ukuthabatha inxaxheba ke kwingxoxo yethu yanamhlanje sitsalela umnxeba ku 011 714 6918 okanye ke ku 011 714 6919. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za or catch us on Facebook or Twitter. Sinazo ke i-messages eziphuma kuni. Ukhona kuZandile yena Zandile Wendinqasa uthi ngicela ukubuza mna kutheni lento kuvuselelwa oko nje. Mazile Precious Maphumulo uthi kusuba kutheni lento sitsalelwe imali kuthiwe i-airtime kodwa singakhange siyithathe, and I think that's something we're trying to address now as well. And George Bongani Wakamatonsi uthi kena ke banks ATMs are overcharging. My advice is that people must wait for the social grant payday to receive all their social grant, and that's George Matonsi from Tlabeni Block C. Sibena ke unosive Mfuku yena uthi yenziwa intoni into yokuba kuthiwe uthenge i-airtime ungayithenganga. I'm sure you're getting the trend. People are experiencing the same common problems. But we were talking about this fraud, and something that I need you to clarify for us, because just last month there was a story or reports that were saying 30 elderly women in Tshwane were robbed of their social grant money. What do you know of this story? And is that the case?
Yes, I'm familiar with the story, and I think there are many stories like that. It's not a question of robbery. I think to put it into context is that people were short paid. They were short paid not by the agency. The agency had paid the full grant into the account. When they received their grant into the accounts, it simply means that they could have received 200 Rand or 300 Rand short paid as a result of, if I may give an example, that a loan that you've entered into an agreement with, and of course you would dispute it to say that I did not. So simply means that once the money hits the account, of course, then the debit order would then be effected, resulting in you being short paid. Now, most of the people who say that I was robbed simply means that he says I was short paid as a result of an unauthorized deduction that went off my account, which I did not authorize. Hence, I would then say that those people that are affected by that would then have to then call to have those unauthorized deductions reversed. The same thing applies with the airtime. If I listen to the messages coming through Facebook, it's a question is that why is somebody trying to sell me something I don't want? And if I don't want it, that simply means that I should never have my account debited. Now, as I would call it ambush marketing, somebody sends you an SMS, would you like to buy airtime for 50 Rand? If you respond to that SMS and you say, yes, I want to buy, it simply means that you're committing yourself to an agreement.
Okay.
If I so put it this way, as soon as you say yes, then they would debit your account. So hence we're saying to people that do not respond to any SMS that sells you any products. But if you have been a victim of that SMS, despite the fact that you didn't buy it, it simply means that the recourse that you have is that call the call center number that will be up on the screen. Of course, those will be reversed and your money will be paid into the account.
All right, sinaye uThembi Buthelezi yena ophume Hillbrow. Thembi wamkelekile enkqubeni?
Ngiyabonga mama. Uyazi ukuthi into engiwarishayo na ukuthi umntwana nangabe bevele ethola i-social grant sekufuneka kuvuseleke. Sokuthatha isikhathi eside kwenziwa yini ukuthi ngoba vele ubevele eyithola imali. Manje kungani isicelo sakhe singasheshe si-approve. Enye into ama-pensioners umuntu uhola vele sekufanele una over 60 years bese kuthiwa imali yakho inqamukile akavuselela uvuselela ukuthi sobuyele phansi ungayenzeka yini ukuthi ube uphinde waba mncane yini abantu abadala abasokoliswa kangaka nalama fingerprint athatha kubantwana abancane umntwana uhlala esivalile isandla uyoza thatha ifingerprint nini ngoba phela umntwana akazulisa isandla mayisanda kuzalwa. Ngiyabonga.
All right, enkosi kakhulu ke Thembi, ngiyabona uyavuma. Frank.
Thank you. 3 issues I think that were raised. Kushuguti, the one, Kushuguti, why do people have to be reviewing? I think we've just finished the re-registration process where we had to re-register everybody onto the new payment system, taking their 10 biometrics and voice biometrics. And I think that method was really necessary to ensure that we clean our database. As far as the issue of older persons are concerned, the review of those grants is necessary due to the fact that we need to know who we're paying and when we're paying those people, and we're paying the right amount. And I think the review of older persons grant generally happens annually. Where the disability grant is concerned, we'd have to review you to make sure that you're still alive. But second to that, we'd have to review to make sure that the medical condition that you had, or you had 5 years ago when you acquired the grant, is still the same. Because in most cases that it could have been a temporary award as a result of a condition that could have been, let me use the example of tuberculosis. If it's treated over 6 months and you take your medication, so SASA will only provide a grant for either 6 or 12 months, depending on the recommendation from the doctor. It is necessary for us to be able to capture those fingerprints. And the reason why I say this, Kushuguti, we've had cases during the re-reg where I will go and borrow Susanda's child and bring it to represent it as my child. Now, most cases that the birth that is registered at Home Affairs, it might not be the biological mother. Ngoba ugogo goes and register the child as the mother. Ngoba umama katholakali. Of late, we did cancel over 300,000 children's grants last month. And that was as a result of the fact we couldn't find these children. So Susanda's got 3 children. Ulethi ngane ibili, esithatha siyitholi. Why? The child does not live with it. The child lives with umama eLimpopo,
right.
But she's getting the benefit. So those grants then we cancel. Ngoba we said the grant should follow the child.
Now ndiyafuna ubuyela kule ngxaki yezivumelwano abantu baye bazifake kuzo. Sisenengxaki abantu abangaqondi kakuhle xa bezifaka kwezi agreements bathi bazifake kuzo.
Kakhulu Sisanda, because a lot of the time abantu abafundi ukuthi basifaka kwini kahle kahle. A lot of the time uzothola ukuthi umuntu usheshe ukuthi athole i-loan yakhe ufuna imali, and you end up signing bathi sizoyenza i-extra uzosigna, and part of what you miss, maybe wena usitshela ukuthi ngizobhadala cash every month or ngizobhadala come and pay for i-loan yam, but in the end the salesman yena utike ukuthi bazothatha from i-debit order, and that is how people sometimes end up ukuthi basenkingeni with money being deducted from either a bank account or the SASA accounts as we have it here, because of such instances ukuthi asifundi before sisayina, we just shisheshele ukuthi sithatha imali sihambe, and whatever happens you're not really interested because awufundi uzovuka when there's money missing from your
After
account.
the break, ndiyafuna ke sijonge consequences of defaulting on those loans. But for now, let's take another commercial break. Hlala kunye nathi ke mbukeli, siyabuya. Sinamkela kwakhona babukeli phambi kokuba ke sihlabele emgama. Khumbula ukuba nawe ungavakalisa zakho izimvo kwincoko yethu. Now participation line is 011-714-6918 or 011-714-6919. Email your views to consumer@sabc.co.za. Ndiyafuna ke sijonge umba wokubana sithetha ngabantu xa sisithi kukho abantu aba-vulnerable, or rather kubani lo uye atargetwe ngaba bantu.
I think, Sisanda, what we need to look at le gama le vulnerable. At times, as consumers, we place ourselves in a vulnerable position, because ukhumule ukuthi before bakunika i-loan, ngemthetho according to the National Credit Act, mele bayenze an affordability assessment, so that they can assess ukuthi lo muntu lo, with the income that they've got and whatever expenses that they've got, will they be able to afford ukuthi bakhokhele enye loan once we've granted it. So leyo affordability assessment, a lot of the time sithola ukuthi ama-consumers badlala ngama-figures lapho, where they misrepresent, maybe grocery we enter for 500 but laphana uzobhala for 300, just so that you can afford, and in the end it ends up ukuthi umuntu becomes over indebted, because now come month end le grocery le you will have to pay 500, it will not turn into 300 rands. So here at times vulnerable people, they are really vulnerable, because uthola ukuthi kunama credit provider they don't perform affordability assessment, and laphana ke sikhuluma nge-reckless lending,
yes.
Because that is not allowed, and umthetho nayo protects consumers anjalo, but at times we put ourselves into a tight spot because of lying on those affordability assessments.
All right, sinaye ke Ayanda yena emnxebeni. Ayanda, wamkelekile enxebeni?
Ma kunjani ma?
Siyaphila futhi kunjani?
Sikhona mama, ngicela ukubuza mama, ngithathe ndanelibhatalelwe imali kwe-admin. Siyavana ma?
Ndiyakuva tata.
Uma abantu ndiyaseka yagcikwa ibhata abayona. Uyingakuya ngiwani uqalile ndiya ku-computer ama-computer ayandikhahlela.
Okay, Ayanda, andiva umbuzo wakho kakuhle kodwa namhlanje ke sithetha
ndingancedakala kanjani xa ndithi xa ndandibole ndandibhatelelwa imali ye-admin.
Alright, ndizawucela ke iproducer yethu mhlawumbi ithathe inombolo yakho sikwazi ukuva kakuhle ingxaki katata uAyanda. Kwangoku ke sithetha ke ngemiba with regards to social grant beneficiaries nobuqhophololo ke obenzekayo with regards to le issue sithetha ngayo namhlanje. Mandize kuwe kwakhona Frank ndibuze kubana whether i-social grant money le grant ifunyanwayo uyakwazi uyithatha as income apho umuntu angakwazi ke ngokuthiwa angaboleka imali.
I think currently at the moment, when people make loans to the various companies, you would note that through adverts, you find these micro-lending companies saying that SASA cards are welcome here. And I think as the agency, we're asking ourselves is that what income would be declared on the application form that would warrant somebody getting a loan, let's say to the value of 2,000 Rand, because I think an income of 1,200 or 1,290 respectively is insufficient, and I would call it more reckless lending to those persons, because I don't think a person earning that type of income can be able to sustain any debt. And I think our position is very clear, is that income in terms of social grants cannot be income defined for the purposes of securing a loan. And I think currently the National Credit Act is under amendment. And the advocacy groups, which includes the Black Sash and the Legal Resources, have made representation to the NCR and to the DTI, and I think SASA will be making representation to say that how can the amendments in the new Act be able to protect the beneficiaries, because I think they are part of the vulnerable people within our society. The agency pays about 10 billion Rand a month, and you find that most companies within the credit and within the short-term and long-term insurance tend to target those people because of the value of the grant. We pay almost 16 million people a month. So simply means that if it's 10 billion, you find them obviously trying to do ambush marketing to these people, trying to sell them loans and other products so that they can get them to send credit agreements. So we're hoping that through these amendments, that with the efforts of all government regulators, we would then say that government should never allow, obviously, the use of the credit, the use of the SASA card as collateral to be able to secure a loan. And I'm hoping that it would address some of the issues that people are experiencing right now.
All right, sinayo Nomazwi from Cape Town. Nomazwi wamkelekile nkubeni? Nomazwi ukhona? Ingathi ke akakho uNomazwi sizawuzama ukubona ke basiyakwazi umfumana na. Going back to this issue of the amendments with regards to the NCA, again the Minister of Social Development had lashed out on money lenders and these loan sharks, and saying that their practices, and you touched on ambush marketing, that's what you were calling it, touched on the fact that what they're doing is basically working against their efforts to alleviate poverty. Actively, what are you doing now to tackle these challenges?
There are several efforts, and I think that the Minister has asked the agency, and she has commissioned. I think some of these include having to partners with regulators within government. Now, you would know that the Financial Services Board regulates short-term and long-term insurance. This could be in terms of funeral loans, the service providers within that space to say, if these people are selling products, are they complying with the rules as set out within the credit industry? If not, we would have to make sure that the Financial Services Board goes and investigates those companies, and where companies are defaulting, the necessary corrective action must be taken. The same thing applies to the NCR in terms of their mandate. If there's non-compliance to the rules, and I think if they are fleecing people and making people sign credit agreements and overextending credit to these people where people can't afford to be able to service that debt is a total violation. And where in some cases people declared grant monies at income, is it really justified to grant that loan? And I think these are some of the efforts. Over and above that, what we're also doing, we're looking at our own legislation as the Department of Social Development, which is the custodian of SASA policy, by saying that we want to tighten up our legislation. If there's any loopholes that allows for people to be able to penetrate the system through dubious ways, we'd have to tighten that. But over and above that, we've started an extensive campaign, and I think driven by the Minister, in terms of where we want to create that awareness campaign. And our key messages that are going out is that do not give your PIN and your card to anybody. Do not respond to SMSs. Do not get into agreements, because these are the consequences of it, because at the end of the day, it means that you will be left out of pocket. But over and above that, we're hoping through these platforms that even as the public broadcaster, you will assist to be able to get this message across, because I think these loans and other are really people putting people out of pocket, and SASA does not support companies that would make their profits on the backs of poor people. It's immoral. And I think at the end of the day is that you're not really assisting that person.
Yes.
Instead, you're putting them more into debt. And I think these are the initiatives, plus the dispute resolution mechanism that is in place to say, if you are aggrieved and did not commit to any agreement, this is the mechanism in place. However, I would like to caution, though, those beneficiaries who continue to sign credit agreements and then come back and say, please, I don't know, we would reverse those. But I must caution to say that loan is not going to go away. Hence, we're saying to them, do not sign, because if you don't pay, the loan amount increases.
Let's talk more about that after this. Is now Kolani from Force Lawyers. Kolani, wamkelekile nkubeni?
Kunjani?
Ndiyaphila tata, kunjani?
Ngiyaphila. Bengisacela ukubuza, nginomntwana owasisi wami washona, manje uhola disability grant. So ikhadi lakhe liyenzeka la blocker 2 months back, and then sahamba somenzele. So ngoba kusathola imali 2 months, uma nasifika ayisekho le mali leyo, sekune 10 rand 50. Kuthi manje kuyenzeka vele ukuthi mhlambe angayilandanga 2 months iya bayithatha, or mhlambe kukhona nje ubugebengu obukhona lapho.
Alright, bengicela usibambele nje kancinci ndibuze bani ufriend ngakwazi uthetha naye ngoku esabambe emnxebeni.
Yes. I think in terms of that question is that if there's any dispute, kusho ukuthi if bekhona imali asithi imali engango 2,000 in the account, awuzange withdraw for whatever reason, ngoba your card was lost and you did a card replacement, or kusho ukuthi you went to reset, in essence that money will remain in your account. And kusho ukuthi if the new money comes in, that would be, if the money for whatever reason was removed from the account, it is a dispute issue. So simply means that he needs to then call our 800 60 0160 and say that there was an amount of 2,000 rand which was in my account and it is now longer there. If it's an issue of fraud, that will be reversed and the amount will be credited back into the account. But we'd have to confirm that in fact there was money in the account.
Kolani usekhona?
Sekhona.
Alright, ke ufriend ukuthi ungakwazi ukucelela umnxeba ku 0800 60 0160 uzama ufumanisa bakwenzeke ntoni nabangakwazi ukunceda apho. I think that's the first step he must take, to call that number so that he can get that help. Thank you very much, Clarence. Siyabulela kakhulu ngubani usicalele umnxeba ke make sibambe apho babukeli sithi ukuvela ke ngasevenkileni. Welcome back mawethu ke sisabele mkamani ncoko yethu. Leyo ndiyafuna sibuyele kumba ukubana ufumana le mali uyifumanayo ayikho ninzi, incinci kakhulu, kodwa uyakwazi uyoboleka imali, but uzawufumanisa into kubana awuzokwazi ke ngokuphinda ubhatale. Let's look at people who default on these loans.
Sisanda, our consequences are the same for everyone. Whether you're a pensioner, whether you are sebenza or kanyin. If utati loan and you have been extended the credit and you say you default ayazukubhatala ngesikhathi or the correct amount, siyazi ukuthi in terms of a credit agreement, ama credit providers, they've got the right ukuthi bahambisi information yakho a credit bureau, so you will get listed. That is one of the consequences ukuthi for anyone who does not pay or stick to credit agreement yabo, you get listed. Sometimes you'll find ukuthi in the end, credit provider azothatha legal steps ukuthi bayithole imali yabo, whether it's through repossession, whether bathatha judgment and they can attach your goods and things like that. There is no exemption or different set of rules. Manje because we pensioner or holy grant that it will not apply to you. So it is applicable to everyone who enters into a credit agreement.
But Frank, what would be deemed a legitimate dispute?
I think a legitimate dispute would be somebody who's gone, obviously, I think there's two scenarios here. Somebody who signed a credit agreement and in some of the cases he might have agreed to pay 300 Rand back. And in some cases the microlender would then double the premium for that month. And that is a dispute because the agreement that says between you and I that you're supposed to take 300. In some of these cases that the microlenders take triple the amount that was agreed upon. And that is a dispute. So it simply means that lodge the dispute says I need my 600 back because I only agree that you take 300 from my account. In some other cases the guy just didn't sign, period. And of course, monies are taken off his account because I think there's a weakness within certain systems. And I think it's something that we're looking at talking to some of the regulators to say that if I sign an agreement and somebody processes that agreement, those should be supported by documents. In the absence of documents and then you go and process it, the consequences that my money's taken already and yet I have not seen the documents where I author. Hence the decision to put the dispute resolution mechanism in place to say, I did not. So when you draw a bank statement, the bank statement must reflect who is the service provider that in fact had your account debited. Because very often, most times, and I think it happens to you and I, you all of a sudden find this debit order and it says something financial services and you know that you've never signed. And when you look and you say, but I don't know this company. So you ask yourself, where do I go and lodge this dispute? And in most cases, it would be your bank saying to your bank that reverse this because I did not authorize. In some cases, they will ask you for the necessary document. In the documentation is very key, you know what I mean, in terms of resolving some of these issues where the disputes are concerned. Yes, it will be reversed by the bank, but as the investigation happens, or if it is found that you did in fact sign, it simply means that you are then liable to pay that. And that is the saddest consequence, because in some cases, some of our people sign for 3 loans at a time, and you get 1,280, and then your installments are 900 Rand. That is really not fair on the person. It comes
back to that issue that it is reckless lending. How do you give somebody 3 loans, and I mean, obviously they can't pay that money back?
But let me then say this to you, that systems don't talk to each other. 3 financial services company systems are not interrelated. If I go there, he doesn't know that one extended credit to that one. He doesn't know that it's only when it comes together as when in the form of the deduction being effected off the account. Then you really see that in essence that he's borrowed 3 times. He himself thinks he can get away with it, but he forgets that in terms of the technology available, most companies that operate within that space, it's simply swipe your card, put in your PIN number, give me your CVM, which is the 3 digits at the back, and give me the expiry date, and voila, the debit order goes through. It's as simple as that. But I think the technology that is available within the banking mainstream makes people also very vulnerable.
All right, I understand that the department again has also stepped in by removing service providers at pay points.
The rules in terms of our regulation simply means that any financial service company that sells products has to be away from the pay point within a 100-kilometer radius. So if you want to sell your products, you want to enter an agreement, you don't do it within our payment space. And that we enforce every month. So most companies would then go and do their business elsewhere. Currently at the moment we've had complaints in various townships that people are going to apply for loans at different counters. Because what we're saying as the agency is that if these companies misrepresent themselves by saying that we're selling you a loan that SASA supports or endorses, it's misrepresentation. But then we will deal with those companies in another way.
Right.
But what we're saying to people is that if a company comes and misrepresents you and saying SASA said you can borrow, say no, because SASA and government does not provide microloans.
Sinayo nonkanyiso emnxebeni nonkanyiso wamkelekile enkqubeni?
Hello mama.
Hello mama.
Mama ndicela ukubuza ndipeyela abantwana abathathu. Then aba babini basuspendelwa ngamawele. Ndaya kwi-office sakwa-SASA lathathwa elinye iwele. Elesibini alathathwa kwathi alikwazi i-application ayikwazi uprocesswa. Ndicela ubuza ke ku-Mr. Frank ithwani ke into xa injalo.
Ngexesha wena ubuye apply baye bathini kuwe?
That apply nge-6 ka-November. Elesibini wele laphendula nge-21. So oko ndihamba phayana bathi abakwazi iprocessa naba bayazi bakwenzeka ntoni. Ndihamba nabantwana bobathathu.
All right. Enkosi kakhulu mama, mamela ke kumabonakude wakho. Frank, what could have happened in this situation?
In some cases it could be in terms of where twins are concerned, they both eligible. So ngicela umama, even if she ID number yak ne producer, I will then investigate it. So kusho ingane mazu 3 or it could be 4 or 5 and there's 2 sets of twins, they are all eligible. So the question of her being denied access to the second twin, obviously it's not justified. Within our policy we make provision to pay for that. So if she can leave her ID number with the producers, I'll follow it up and a contact number and I'll make sure that I investigate it, and if it is found that it was obviously wrongly done, we'll take corrective action and the monies will be paid to her from the date that she applied.
All right, I hope nokanyuso ifumene lonto leyo. Frank uthi ke zama ke ushiya ID number yakho, ushiyeke nenombolo abazakwazi ukutsalela umnxeba kuyo uzawuzama ukunceda kwimeko yakho. Let's take our final break. Please stay tuned. Welcome to our last segment. Isiqhubekeke ngencoko yethu. Looking at some of your messages, uSansiwe Magoda uthi kukho nokubolekisa kwemali yegranti by deductor monthly. Why does SASA agree to this? There's Tebucho Mitsing uthi ke they must try to catch and prosecute the culprits. They must go all out and they must not show any mercy. Si kubekho uTumi busika Tumza uthi ke, can Bathabile please visit Stutterham in the Eastern Cape and see how our grandparents are being used for their grant money. Those are some of the messages, but I want to go back to the one by Tebucho Mitsing who was saying try to catch and prosecute culprits. How many cases are you looking at in terms of, we did outline that it's not scamming per se, but you do have people who, how can I put it now, that commit this crime or this corruption?
I think the number of people who enter into credit agreements is not really known to SASA, because this thing does not happen within the SASA environment. It happens within the banking environment and outside of that. But that information generally would be available through the National Credit Regulator, because they regulate that space. So if you have to say that, let's assume that a particular store is providing credit to these people, and if we would then pick up that issue and then we would report it to the National Credit Regulator and say this particular organization is extending loans to they would then go, in terms of their mandate, they can go and demand that information from that company, the credit agreements and things, as part of their investigation. So we can't at this time say who has entered into an agreement, because it's an agreement between two parties, and SASA is not part of that agreement because we don't endorse or support those agreements. But I think there's a lot of investigations underway by the National Credit Regulator, and I think it's part of their responsibility where they would investigate companies who are not complying with the National Credit Act. So the depth of the problem is unknown to SASA at this time, but of course we are working, like I said, with the National Credit Regulator for them to assist us to investigate. So as we get the complaints in, let's assume 10 people complain about a particular company, we would then gather the information, do the reversals, but then hand over that information to the relevant authorities, which includes the law enforcement authorities, to go and investigate and take the necessary corrective measures to address it.
All right, it's Naye Unongelizwe from Western Cape. I hope I got that name right. Unongelizwe?
Hello, ma.
Hello, mama.
Ndingunongezile masali eXhosa, ndinengxaki mama, ndipeya imali yokugula yamehlo. Imali yakhona bathi masiye kogqirha. Saya kogqirha, xa siya kogqirha kwabuya impendulo ethi iphelile. Ndithe xa ndiyonyathelisa ipeyi yabantwana, ngesikhathi kunyathelisa iminwe yavela imali yami kodwa xa ndiyibuza kubo bathi iphelile ngicela ubuza.
Enkosi kakhulu Mama Frank, did you get that?
Yes, I did get it, Gushuguti. It's the question, Gushu Amehlo. So simply means is that as she begins to say this question, asazi ukuthi whether it's a temporary or a permanent award. Ngoba in the cases, Gushuguti, if maybe itoli mali, it could have been for 6 months or 12 months, depending on the condition of the eye. It could have been an injury that made it disabled for 6 months. So the benefit we would pay for 6 months and it would end. As far as the children's concerned, if there was a benefit payable and of course that benefit was stopped, there would have been a justified reason. The child is no longer eligible, but in most cases, obviously, if she feels that to some aggrieved to that, like I said, there's that mechanism in place in terms of, like the caller now, she could leave her ID number and details and contacts. I'll investigate and make sure that I get back into resolve.
All right, now, with regards to everything we've been saying this afternoon, just tips to give to consumers today.
I think the big one being we have to complain. If kunenkinga, all the agencies, National Credit Regulator, even SASA, if we are not complaining as a nation, kusho there will be no difference ukuthi inkinga to see sicazulule. The other thing is that let's not be hasty ukuthi sign ama agreement, because in the end uzohlala unenkinga ukuthi imali yakhe yatsalwa or you can't afford to pay those loans over. And I think once you enter, because sometimes people enter into ama credit agreement, ama loan legitimately because they need to, whether uvuli account impahla or you taking a loan for a good reason, stick to the arrangements.
All right.
Yes.
Sinayo Lindiwe Mncebeni. Lindiwe wamkelekile Nkqubeni? Lindiwe ukhona? Okay, Lindiwe akakho. Frank, let's touch on the issue of education. Uneo was just saying people must know their rights, must know their rights. Education, because what I'm trying to get back to is the kind of questions that we're getting from people. Are they aware exactly what is supposed to happen?
Yeah. I think as one of the interventions that we're doing is that, first of all, we want to go out and say that companies who misrepresent themselves saying that SASA supports or endorses these products, and that is the perception we want to correct, and that we would correct through educating our people in the country that government or SASA does not provide microloans, because I think people feel vulnerable. If I come to you and I say that SASA says you can borrow this money, you feel confident that it's SASA, it's government, they're extending loans. So we want to educate people to say SASA does not provide. Secondly, we want to say to people, do not enter into any credit agreements, because ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to have to pay back that loan. Thirdly, we're saying to people, do not respond to any SMSs or emails or any other vehicle where people are using ambush marketing to be able to sell their products. And I think if people can begin to do that, SASA will be embarking on an extensive campaign through radio and other methods to be able to educate people. So you'll see posters, pamphlets, radio ads, TV commercials in the next 2 months, educating the people at large in different languages on what to do and what not to do. And we also have what we call You and Your SASA card. You and Your SASA card deals with a lot of these issues contained in there.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our studio guests for their time. Please join us again next Friday for another live consumer topic of the week. Please join us every Monday morning from 9:30 to 10:30. When Sister Sandra join us and the entire team, it's goodbye. You may